What's up, ladies and gents? This is going to be your very first actual live cast here on the Red Bang Cast channel. Now, this is mostly going to be sort of a test of the equipment, see how much internet it uses, stuff like that. But for the most part, we're just going to be talking about one subject for maybe 30 minutes, maybe less, who knows. But however long it takes me to talk about Hellbound Hellraiser II. This is going to be the second review in the Hellraiser review series. But first, I did want to let you know, this for the most part is sort of going to be how it is on this channel. We're going to be doing reviews live like this, if this tends to work here on Emoze, which I think is just a really great app if it turns out to work. So, let's go ahead and get started with this. Now, the beginning here is going to be just talking about Hellraiser, the original. So, the original came out, box office success, pretty much a critical success as well. There were some people who had problems with the music, Clive Barker's direction, stuff like that. But, for the most part, pretty much everybody liked Hellraiser. And it became sort of that kind of cult phenomenon, and they decided, well, a couple years later, make a sequel. So in 1989 came Hellbound Hellraiser II, also produced by Clive Barker, just like the original, but Clive Barker was not the director. I can't remember the name of the director for this one, but he was a little bit more experienced in the area of directing, editing, and producing film than was Clive Barker. So that sort of gives Hellbound Hellraiser 2 a little bit of credibility that I think the first Hellraiser didn't have. Though Clive Barker sort of was more of a name than whoever this other guy was. Like I said, I can't even remember his name. But it sort of gives the movie a little bit of credibility to know that actual filmmakers who'd been making films before, unlike Clive Barker, were actually going into this. But Clive Barker did have a little bit of creative power in there. Like I said, he was a producer, and I think he was a producer on this as well as Hellraiser 3: Hell on Earth. So you can sort of feel his influence on the first three films, whereas as the series goes on, you sort of see it straying away. So, first off, I want to begin by saying that Hellraiser 2, I think, is a better film than the original Hellraiser. Not by much. There's still sort of the same feel of the original Hellraiser. There's still menace. There's still that commentary on people seeking out worldly pleasures of the flesh. So you've got that going for it, and you've also got that sort of Clive Barker feel. The writing is very similar to the original. I think the writing perhaps is a little bit better in this one than in the original. There's a little bit more cohesive dialogue. There's a little bit better story, I think, because it expands into the universe of Hellraiser. We look into what their version of Hell is, which is, it's run by the Cenobites. So it's a place of pleasure for the Cenobites and absolute hell for anyone else. So you've got that going for it. And also, you have sort of a little bit of comedy injected into this version, whereas I think pretty much the original is pretty bereft of comedy. This sequel actually has a little bit in it, and it has it has lots better kills, better special effects, I think, than the original. And with the sort of comedy and stuff comes sort of something that I think some horror fans have a problem with this film, and plenty of other sequels, like I would say probably Nightmare on Elm Street 3 through 6, and that's the one-liners. There are some one-liners in here, whereas in the original there was sort of Come to Daddy, which continues throughout the Hellraiser series, sort of an earthly antagonist using Come to Daddy as sort of his catchphrase. And there is that in here a couple times. There's also Come to Mother, because Julia is now sort of the Frank of this series, of this film. And there's also a bunch of one-liners by a character who I won't give away, who becomes a Cenobite by the end of the movie. Yes, we actually see someone becoming a Cenobite. And that'll be the first time we see that here in this series, someone actually becoming one. And I really like that aspect of it. I really like the aspect of Cenobites coming out of human beings. People who are just obsessed with this pleasure and this awe-inspiring amount of pleasure-pain that comes from that puzzle box actually turning into Cenobites. And we get sort of some backstory, which is sort of hit or miss with me as far as horror and using backstory, especially in horror series. For instance, backstory killed Michael Myers. Backstory sort of made Freddy Krueger cheesy. Thankfully, they haven't gone into too much backstory on Jason, and they're starting to go into backstory on the characters in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, namely Leatherface. I think either later this year or next year there's going to be a Leatherface prequel, where we're going to learn about Leatherface's childhood, which is probably going to be absolutely horrid, but what can you do? But in this, it actually works. I like the fact that, you get that aspect of Pinhead has become a Cenobite because he's obsessed with all of this pleasure and all of this horrible pain that comes with it. He was a soldier in I think it's World War II. It could have been World War I, but I think it's World War II. And to fill his need for pleasure during the war, he turned towards the puzzle box, which I think is rather interesting. I really like that aspect. Also, I think a strength of this is that it's not as easy to compare to the novel, which I will review sometime, not now, but sometime. You don't get that aspect of, oh, well, the novel did this better in this particular part of the story, or the novel has better, dialogue, because the sequel is a little bit removed from the novel, whereas the original is totally coming off of that novel area. As far as the story's concerned, I think it's really good. I like the acting in the movie. Claire Higgins is fantastic as Julia, yet again. She's probably the highlight of this movie, besides, of course, the great Pinhead moments and the great Cenobite moments. The Cenobite moments here are fantastic. There's a few more Cenobite moments here than there was in the original Hellraiser, which I always like. I like a lot of Cenobite moments. I like to be able to see Pinhead and his fellow Cenobites in action. I really love that part of Hellraiser 2. It just works so much better, I think, than the original, because you get to see a little bit more of the Cenobites. At this point, we sort of know what the Cenobites are. The mystery is a little bit decreased, except with that backstory that I've talked to you about. And I don't know, it just seems funner to watch. It just seems like a better film. I think the cinematography in particular is much better in this one than the original. It sort of retains that Clive Barker feel that he was trying to give with the original Hellraiser. But I think that as far as, besides the artistic shots that Clive Barker, I think, brought, for the most part, this is sort of more minimalist, but it just works. I don't know, it just seems like it works better in this than it does in Hellraiser. I'm not quite sure why. I just think maybe the use of Steadicam here is a little bit better than the original Hellraiser. Not quite sure, but there's just something about it that I like better. um, but yeah, overall, I just have to say that I think Hellraiser 2 is a much better movie than the original Hellraiser. Um, that's not to diminish the fact that the original Hellraiser is a good movie. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I can say it's a good movie. But personally, I just think that this sequel is far better than the original. It's one of those sort of movies. I know there's plenty of people who will probably disagree with me. You know, the original Hellraiser is fantastic, I'm sure most people will say. And I'm sure there will be others who are like, yeah, well, I think they're about on the equal level, sort of like Alien and Aliens, or The Godfather and Godfather 2. But to me, I've got to just say that I think the sequel ramps it up to a degree that I like just a little bit better. It's a little bit more zany, it's got some comedy in it, but it retains that horror. The special effects, I think, are much better. One thing I can say about the special effects, the skinless suit that Claire Higgins has to wear in this, fantastic. I absolutely love the way it looks. I think it's much better than it was when you had Frank in the skin suit. I just think those special effects are a little bit better. And I think it's photographed more lovingly because she's a woman. And I think that perhaps because she's a woman, it adds something to it, a degree of sexuality that I think maybe I didn't connect with Frank. I think maybe because Clive Barker is an out homosexual man, maybe he was trying to do some of that with Frank. But I think sort of as a straight director, this other director sort of brings something to the character of Julia that is much more sexual and much more alluring in a sort of horrible way. So in a way, I do like this one more than the original Hellraiser, and I think right now I would probably say this is my favorite Hellraiser movie. Perhaps not my favorite Hellraiser property. When I say property, I'm including the film franchise and the book. But right now, I've got to say Hellraiser 2 is probably my favorite Hellraiser movie. I have watched Hellraiser 3, and I would do a review of it in a heartbeat if I had the time. Right now, I've got to go do a couple things. Maybe I'll be back. Maybe I'll wait to do this later. But I can give you one announcement. It's going to come later tonight. Ladies and gents, we are going to have a live broadcast here on the Red Band Cast channel. It's going to be a live commentary with my buddy Steve. Yeah, that's right, Steve and Steve, for the first time on the internet. Steve and Steve doing a live commentary for a movie that is 10 years old this year, Hatchet. And I'll get into my love-hate relationship with Hatchet. I'm sure Steve will get into his relationship with the franchise, and I'm sure Adam Green as well. And we'll just have a fun time watching this movie, and hopefully you guys will watch along with us. So, take care. Thank you for watching. Rock on. If you like, subscribe. I'll talk to you later. Bye.